Glad to have Connor on again. We're going to dive right into the whole ICE, we'll just call it a protest. The ICE protest, a group of protesters went into a church in Minneapolis over the weekend, which now it appears that what they believe to be the issue, which was there was a pastor or somebody associated with the church that was an ICE agent or affiliated with ICE, which my understanding, everything I've seen since then is that that is not the case. So, Connor, glad to have you on here.
Glad to be back.
And like I said, we'll dive into that. Well, I'd also like to talk about some of the things that were concerning to you as far as some of the tactics that ICE was using. And you did some comparisons earlier when we talked, but let's go straight into the situation. I think it's twofold. One is you have a group of people that go and interrupt a service. I think the optics of that are horrible. And just the I think it's kind of interesting that your First Amendment right. You've got two competing interests that are both saying like we have a right to do this, but like you have one that is like, in my opinion, I don't think anybody in that church was out there. I don't know how you look at a church, something, a service and a church service being anything other than peaceful. Yeah. And so to interrupt that and honestly, like expose innocent people to that level of anger, whatever you want to call it, I just think it was unnecessary. I think to me, it was worse because you had a well-known journalist that went in there and one of the interviews that I saw Don Lemon do was like he was like right on top of the pastor, and the pastor was like, kind of like, you're in my space, and he's into that, like, don't push me. I'm like, dude, you're inside his church with a bunch of people that are disturbing his service. The fact that you walked out of there, I think is a positive thing. And so I guess my first question is did they pick a church because they knew that people were peaceful? I doubt they would go to an ICE briefing and attempt something like that.
No, so I think I think this touches on a point that we were kind of talking about before we started, and it's where even as a left of center individual, I start to look at my own folks and go, all right, if we're claiming the high road, we have to stay on the high road, which is, if I'm going to sit there and criticize ICE for showing up at immigration hearings at courts or going into schools or hospitals or these places that have been reported that they've showed up on that I disagree with, I think they should be, through one degree or another, kind of a like, we don't go mess around at a school, we figure out a different approach. I think that same standard applies to my own side of things, which is, no, you don't go and interrupt, church service because you heard that maybe the pastor had some affiliation or support or interaction with ICE agents, especially when details are probably secondhand or not entirely clear. So I think if the expectation is that protesters are expected or First Amendment, we're allowed, they're allowed to protest, they're allowed to voice their opinion. There are things that, while we might disagree with the verbiage or the means, it's still one where there are just certain things where you're like, all right, this could legally be okay. This could be protected by First Amendment, but morally or just, not humanity, but like just common sense. It's like, don't touch a church, don't touch a school, don't touch a hospital. Like, if there's an ICE agent that got hurt and they're in a hospital, you don't go and harass him in his hospital room. Like, there's stuff that to me is just respectfully, out of bounds. If you want to, if Don Lemon wanted to go in after the church service as a former reporter, he should know better, and go in after the service and say, Father, can I have a conversation with you? This is what we've heard. do you have anything to say? Can we talk? Can we have the conversation that you and I are trying to have about stuff like this?
Mhm.
That I'm okay with. That's a respectful approach. That's, showing an intended peaceful conversation. But
I think that's the key. Is I think it's a conversation. It's not about like creating controversy or anything else. It's a conversation where somebody is like a back and forth with the hope that like we're going to accomplish something in the process of it. And I think that's where I struggle. Like you mentioned a hospital for an ICE agent. Where do we draw the line? Because everybody wants to piss and moan about the agents wearing masks, but the reason they wear their mask is because there are people on the left that put their information out there, and they show up at these public servants' homes where their wife and children or significant other are, or parents or anything else who have nothing to do with their occupation. And I just think in the past, like that, people would never do that. They respected.
And I think that's a problem kind of across the board, because I've heard of, and I couldn't tell you any right off the top of my head, but I've come across over the months, people from the right putting people they saw at protests or whatever, say like doxing. It's bad across the board. It happens. It should not. I
don't think that is a right side thing. I think, because I agree with you. When Charlie Kirk was killed, one of the things I had a problem with on our side is they called out some reporter that, I mean, and what they said was a vile thing to say, but like they tried to cancel him. Like, oh, we should get rid of him. And I think you should say like that is like unnecessary, but like just trying to destroy somebody because they have an opinion different than yours. I don't think that's the way to go. I think there should be some measure of like, I'm not going to lie to you. When I hear, just from a law enforcement standpoint, something that's happened in Virginia where they're introducing a House bill where they're going to take away qualified immunity for law enforcement, where I will put this out there now. You'll see anywhere from at least 20%, if not more, officers leave law enforcement if that's gone. And I think about the politicians that talk about that, like, hey, this is a good idea. And they're the very ones that have like protective details. They have money to provide their own security because they're going to destroy law enforcement. And I think that is one of the things that people need to take into account is for every decision that is made, there is fallout and consequences of it. And I think just like what you're saying, and we can get into that in a little bit, but like I don't think you can go in there and say, hey, this is off limits, like schools are off limits, just like what you said, schools are off limits. You shouldn't go in here. You shouldn't go in here. And then you do the very thing that you talk about. But one of the things that the protester said that I thought was relevant is the argument that you made. And this is not a gotcha moment. It's just, I think where you have well-intentioned, you're well-intentioned with what you're saying. So you said like, we have got to protest where we make it real for people. And that's what they said going into that church, is they said, we want people to see this and realize that like you're not safe to worship because you won't stand up for people that are immigrants and everything else. And I think one of the things that you would say about both sides, like any religion that you pick, even I always think about like everybody wants to say like Islam's a war, and it's not. Like you have some people that are just like us, like well-intentioned and want to do the right thing. But I think the problem that you run into is when you have the other extreme on both sides and aren't willing to like work together and just say that's wrong, like you can't do that. And I don't think anybody it doesn't seem like there is anybody that people are so worried about getting jammed up by other people or like called something nasty. They're like, I'm not going to call that out. I'm comfortable where I'm at. If my set says something stupid or does something stupid, I'm not going to call them out on it. So
yeah, and I think like with the church thing, like to me the hard threshold for me, I would probably have to say is the like going in during the service. Like if you feel it's bad enough and you want to be outside on a public sidewalk being like, this dude is, this pastor is supporting whatever and we disagree with it, okay, I might still think that that's a little disrespectful in the midst of a service for all of the just attendees who are just there to worship. But to cross that literal threshold and go in and interrupt in the midst of a service, if that's, again, my details or my understanding of the situation is more limited, but if that's what had happened, I think that crosses a line. And I would say the same thing if that church had a high immigrant population and ICE busted in the middle of a service to try and detain people. Like, it's wrong on both sides. And it's common decency, I think, and what we were kind of talking about.
That's a great way of saying it. It is a common decency on both sides, and I think when we talk about tactics and stuff like that, I think one of the things that frustrates me, and we'll just talk about this real quick, and then we'll go into the bigger picture. But like from my standpoint, when we talked about the RICO statute that was going to be applied, so let me ask you this: let's just run this down real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think one of the most heinous acts that I've heard of is that kid that went in and shot up that black church in South Carolina and just did it because it was a black church, and to me, like that is.
When was that?
That's been years ago.
Yeah. In like the North Carolina or Georgia church, whatever it was.
I think it was South Carolina, but either way, like from my standpoint, like that, like those people did nothing to deserve that. Like nothing other than like actually welcoming that kid in. That's the only thing they did. Like, and they they had their hands out on, like, to think that that somebody has that much hate to a particular group. And I think that's one of the problems is we use hateful words and hateful descriptions of people to dehumanize them. And you actually have people that will act on those like that kid did. And I think that's one of the bad things about it. And even from the standpoint of, I think time will tell that, like, the thing that happened with Charlie Kirk was like somebody that like just took that and said, this isn't another human being, that his life is not valuable. And so I'm going to take it because I don't agree with what he says. And I think that's the slippery slope that we get into when we start, when we get into.
And what, like, it's kind of a weird take to have, but what I think is almost worse is, so like taking the Charlie Kirk thing is like, I disagree with his shooting. I don't think he deserved to die. Where I look at that and go, this was an individual who had opinions about what Charlie Kirk said and felt they were strong enough opinions to act on them, and they took Charlie's life. I don't think that is okay. I don't think his words justify being killed. But where it's interesting to me in terms of this part of this conversation is like, that was a one-to-one. Person was upset, person took actions at the person that upset him. Where I see it being so interesting or different, I don't even know what the right word is. It just intriguing, I guess, in an intellectual sense, is these moments where I'm going to say something and it's going to get you worked up, and then you are going to go hurt other people, not me, or not like getting people amped up of, racial tensions or whatever. And so like, people getting worked, this kid feeling a certain way because of something he's heard of, minorities being lesser. So then he goes and shoots up an African-American church. Like, that to me is such a different mental hurdle, or I don't even know what I would call it, but just this sense of like, it's not a one-to-one. It's not I'm mad at you, so I come after you. It's I'm mad and I get you worked up and you go hurt. Like, it just baffles me. It really does.
So let's talk about that for a second. Is if we're going to talk about that. So I feel like, for me, I feel like there is so many people. There are so many people that are out there that are trying to like identify different ways so they can like divide the population up. So like one against the other. I mean, we talked about that before. If the 1% can keep the 99% angry with each other. I mean, anybody that's ever had a really bad supervisor that was like stirring up stuff between the underlings, so they never had to worry about anything, as far as like somebody challenging their authority. like that was the way they managed. And then in the same way, I think you have these groups that like keep everything stirred up in different ways. So to go that route for the RICO statute, we discussed that as far as people that provide resources to target individuals and groups, you know, based on just based on the fact of like, hey, we think this is a protest or whatever else. So like for me, my question to you is this: is if the federal government finds out that a entity funded it, identified a church, so basically they provided the resources, identified a target, and sent these people in there to disrupt that service and violate someone's constitutional rights, should there be some kind of ramification for that?
I think short answer, yes. I think if you can create, and I think we talked about this on the RICO one too, where like my concern with the RICO thing was not necessarily the stated intention, which is if I can find a one-to-one where like I paid you to go to a protest to agitate it and get people worked up, yeah, that's instant. I think it like in a very roundabout way, I would look at it as the same way as like if I was searching to hire a hitman, like I'm still held accountable for those actions. So if it's that path, you know, like I said, the RICO thing, it's more the, do I trust it to be done the way that it's stated? No, but we already had that conversation. But yes, if there's a trackable paper trail, so to speak, that said, I found out that this pastor may have said something to help ICE or worked with ICE or whatever, so I got people worked up and sent them specifically there to harass. Yeah, I mean, I think that
I'll take it a step further, is if you find out there is a group of people that are just trying to drag other people into the fight. So in other words, we've already divided by color. We've already divided by ethnicity. We've also, now we're going to go after the religious component of it. Like let's keep the Christians and the Muslims and all these, the Hindu, all these different religions, the Jewish, all those different things. So like if you have somebody and you could prove that, hey, from a religious standpoint, I want to go after this particular group just because they fit the mold of they are Christian. It's a church. I don't even know what kind of church it was. So I'm applying the word Christian broadly. Like I'm not talking Southern Baptist, Presbyterian, or anything else. We'll say Protestant. Let's say that. So let's just say they're Protestant and they believe a certain thing, and so this entity is only created to stir up one from the other. So let's just say at the end of it, we find that there is funding for all this that are coming from, let's just talk about Somalia. Let's just say the Somalian population up there that was sending money overseas from money that was from taxpayers. So in other words, you have people from Somalia that are here illegally. They're getting benefits. You know, they are getting resources from the federal government to create these type of programs to assist other people. What happens if through the course of the investigation that you find out there is a underlying issue of I am of a different religion, of a different color, or just like, or a different ideology, like I just don't believe in what you're doing. So I am going to create this friction between these two different groups. So I'm going to say, I'm going to send a black reporter, an African-American reporter, into a predominantly white church to say that this is a problem. And so the reporter can come back out and actually say, and you can read the transcript of what Don Lemon said, which was basically, this is part of their whiteness. I'm trying to think of the exact wording. I'll let you get your response to it, and I'll give you the exact wording.
I think I'm lost slightly. Like what's your exact question on this? Like what is the
question is that if you find out that a group of people were paid to target another group just to stir up discontent between two different groups to create an environment like we find ourselves in where everybody's fighting with each other are the people that created that environment, that funded it, the leaders of that environment, would they qualify to be investigated and ultimately charged under the RICO statute?
I think it would at least open the door for the investigation. I think there would have to be kind of like what we talked about with RICO. Like, I would want to make sure that there were clear guidelines as to what were the chargeable offenses. Again, just that, like, if there's, if I happen to be the point of like, oh, if I happen to work for the company that the dude, like, if my paycheck from a company does not count as being funded by that company, you know what I mean? So, like, yeah, I think generally, loosely speaking, if there is that direct paper trail that this group or this individual or whatever specifically paid individuals, and I don't mean the sense of like they bought the posters and they covered any permit costs, or they put in like the tertiary funding to organize an event. Like, I think that's different. But if it's like, I specifically paid you $100 to go to this event and start a fist fight with someone that escalated things, yeah, I would say that that's probably at minimum open to an investigation.
Okay, so it is like, you do feel like if they were to find that out, that would be a legitimate federal investigation because of the constitutional issues involved.
Well, I'm not a constitutionalist in the sense of like, I don't know what
But
all is covered, but like generally speaking,
obviously
yeah,
violating the people in that church's right to peacefully to peaceful assemble and to select their religion and be able to practice their religion with freedom.
Well, sure, but I think in this case it had nothing to do with the religious aspect of it. It was
but I disagree. I think that this was a very clear, targeted thing, and they lined everything up. I'll give you, this is what he said. This is according to Grok, Lemon's defense. He denied affiliation with protesters, framed it as reporting on constitutional rights, and later on his podcast criticized churchgoers' entitlement tied to white supremacy. So exactly what you just said people do that is wrong. We're not one for one. We're going to paint a group of people with a broad brush because we think one of the people is affiliated with ICE. Anyway, he says, criticize churchgoers for entitlement tied to white supremacy, saying discomfort is part of the protest. He argued journalism isn't shielded, but insisted his actions were protected. And it says this fits the wider ICE riots protest in Minneapolis, post the Good shooting and Operation Metro Surge. So like, what I am theorizing is that you have a predominantly Muslim population. The people that funded Renee Good's are part of the funding mechanism for Renee Good's association, correct? That trained her. One of the things that we looked at was there was an affiliation that was counter ICE. So my question is if we find, and I don't have the answer, but like my theory would be that you have a predominantly Muslim group, Somalians,
mm-hmm.
You have a Christian church, and what better way to stir up discontent between the two groups is to piss off the Christian group. You've already pissed off the Muslim group because you've already stirred them up and said, this is what you need. You've already stirred them up because you're saying like, these people are like the Gestapo. They're doing this, this, and this. So let's drag another group into it. I think it's no different than the crap that they do with the Hamas and the Israelis. Like, they're always like trying to find a way to like find differences. Instead of like,
my hesitation would just be like, if that direct paper trail where all of that is proven or shown, sure, but it's I get
But
where.
why would you? So just strictly from your standpoint, why would you choose to go to a church?
So my understanding, and again, like
I'm just asking from your standpoint, without like knowing what their motivations are or anything else. Why would you choose a church and then make the statements afterwards, basically blaming the people that were peacefully gathered to worship? Why are you going to blame them and try to like paint them with this broad brush? And like part of your protest is to shame the people sitting in there. And I feel like that is what I think that's what the BLM movement was, and everything else is like shame on the police. Every single police officer is this, and that's not correct. And I think there's like fallout from that.
Yeah, no, and so I'm going to respectfully say I don't know enough about the church and the situation surrounding it to comment specifically that it was this or that. My understanding at this point, or going into this, was that the people went to that church because the pastor had worked with or supported or affiliated or had some positive relationship with ICE agents, and that was their reasoning for going there. I was unaware of any religious motivation in the initial reasoning for going. I haven't seen the Don Lemon.
But here's the thing. Think about it like this: did ICE take Sunday off, and so they're like, "Hey, let's go to a church and stir it up there"? Like, there is not. I don't think, just like you said, history has a way of repeating itself, or it looks familiar. My question to you, and it goes both ways. I think when you look at you were talking about Germany and everything else, and like how that all went, like the religious component was definitely there, and
sure, but do we know the people that went to the church weren't also Christian? Like, do we know for sure that it was a different religious affiliation going into a presumably Christian church?
I'm just saying, I'm asking that question. I'm saying, like, my theory is, I don't think it is a Muslim against a Christian thing. I think it is agitators trying to like form that connection of conflict and saying like, well, you're either for the Somalians who are Muslims, or you're for the Christians that are in that church. You can't have it both ways. When in fact, what it is you have good people on both sides that are trying to do the right thing. I don't think it's an accident, and I don't think it's an accident they selected a church. I don't.
I just think you're honestly, I think you're giving it way too much. Like, you're making it way more complicated than it needs to be. I think it is genuinely as simple as people are already amped up to 11. They heard this dude said something to ICE. We don't really know, or they may not even know, and so they just blindly went after it. Like, I think you're just overcomplicating it, and it's something as simple as, we heard this dude said something to ICE, so we're going to go and interrupt.
So
because that's just groupthink on a far more simplified level.
I mean, I think it's easy to say it's simplified, but I just find it very, very curious that you had a well-known journalist that just happened to be with this group of protesters to put that information out there. Like, I think that has. This is the way I think. What I think is
it doesn't surprise me that there are known entities in terms of social media influencers, former journalists, all this kind of stuff in Minnesota, because Minnesota's been in the news for the last 3 months and it's just been escalating. So it makes sense to me that we would start to see more, known individuals being at these things. So like, that doesn't really surprise me all that much. So for instance, to kind of to swing this a little bit, because it kind of applies. So on the opposite side, or the opposite end of the spectrum of this to a degree. So we had a anti-ICE protest going on somewhere in Minneapolis, I believe. Okay. And there was this dude, this known right-wing conservative who showed up, Jake Lang. He was a pardoned Jan 6th participant. He's openly the video that shows of him showing up to this anti-ICE protest starts with him giving a Nazi salute, like, and I'm talking like hard slap of the chest, hard 45 degree. And so this was a anti-ICE protest that he individually, with cameras, with whatever, went to and inserted himself into, escalating things, agitating people because he's clearly on the other side of what everyone in this group is, starts getting like water balloons thrown at, like he stands himself up on like a window ledge up above everyone else, starts getting water balloons thrown at him, and then it turns into this whole thing of he was attacked and this, that, and the other. And yeah, he was like, you see him get pulled away at one point. He's got like blood coming down the back of his head because someone like hit him with something or whatever, which again, I'm not condoning the violence at all, but I look at that and I go, you put yourself in a situation that you knew would escalate. And what's truly kind of amazing about this moment, there's these videos going around and I don't think this kid, I don't know anything else about this person I'm about to talk about besides this one video, besides this one interaction I've seen with him. But it's this young black kid in a jacket, whatever, who's defending Jake Lang. He's telling people to back off. He's telling people to leave him alone. He's got an arm around, like he's escorting him out, getting him to safety. Mm-hmm. I don't know anything about the kid prior to this, but this alone like is not getting enough attention of how this kid put himself in harm's way to get this person, Jake Lang, out of a situation that he caused for himself. And so when I look, so like to kind of tie it in, it's this like, to what degree, Don Lemon shows up and makes these comments about this church that inflame a situation, potentially. This kid, known entity on the conservative. I've seen accusations of him being a white supremacist. I don't know that. I'm not going to confirm that, but it's popped up when you look at his.
When we say conservative how? That would be like that would be my question, is conservative how? Because what you
conservative. So the quick little blurb that I pulled up on him. Jake Lang is a controversial figure known for his involvement in the January 6th Capitol riot and subsequent political violence. He was pardoned by President Trump and has been involved in organizing anti-immigrant marches and protests. Lang's actions have drawn criticism for their divisive nature and have led to protests and counter-protests across the country. He's a polarizing figure in the political landscape. But again, like, the reason I would say he might probably be a white supremacist is the video I saw of him going to this protest. It starts with a hard Nazi salute. But it's this thing where my point being overall is, you look at that and people immediately wanted to blame, understandably, like, again, I'm not condoning violence in any way, but people look at this group, and groupthink is very much a thing that reacted poorly to him being there. But I look at it and I go, if I walk up to a beehive and smack it with a baseball bat, I can't then get pissed if I'm getting stung by the bees, because it's a situation I created for myself. So something like, tying it to the church, it's, if this group busts into a church in the middle of a service to, confront this pastor, I don't feel like they then get to play the victim card of saying, well, why are you guys mad at us? This, that, and the other, because they interrupted a moment and created a situation that need not be created at that time.
Oh, I don't think they're not apologetic at all. They feel like they have the moral high ground. And but
which I'm saying is, like, I'm still on the side of they were in the wrong for busting into a church and interrupting a service.
But what you're just describing is I feel like a parallel on the other side of, I do not think that kid just decided to show up and do all that. Like, and I think there are entities that are trying to pull good people on the left into this, like, hey, everybody on the right are a bunch of Nazi fascists, or I can't ever say that word. I'm gonna just stop. Fascist. That's what these people are. And so they want to identify and divide. And I think that to me is the problem. The problem is that, like, we're not, he didn't show up. Don Lemon or that kid didn't show up to say, I'd like to hear what you have to say about this.
Correct.
They came in there with accusations and conflict. And to think that, like, this just happened to just like everything just happened to come together is just, like, ridiculous. It's almost like to talk about Venezuela, it's almost like saying like the military just happened to they just happened to make it work. No, there's a lot of preparation and everything else. And I think we're foolish to think that there aren't groups of people that like nothing better than the lower 99% to be like headbutting each other back and forth and finding differences instead of like what you just described with that young kid that comes in there and goes, let me help you. I see another person who doesn't believe anything probably that I believe, but I'm going to help them. So like from my standpoint, I think that I look at that and go, that's not an accident. Like this, you chose that church for a reason. They didn't go. I think about it like this. Like they didn't go. Like I think it's one of those things. It was like, here's a reason to do this. Let's organize this, and we think we have a reason to do it. But you still had to think about like, hey, there is somebody. To me, 100%, there is somebody up there that is like, that is thinking. So think about it like this, and this is the thing I used to think about in the military all the time is like we have our battle space, but you have somebody up above you, a major, captain, everything else above you, and they have the whole battle. They don't not only have your battle space, they have the whole battle plan for the entire area.
Yeah.
And I think there are people that have a larger plan, and part of their plan, and look at the results. I mean, we talk about it all the time about like, look at the end result. Like you can't, I think it's easy to, well, I think it's this, or I think it's that. Like, let's just have an agreement that like there are forces out there that want us to be divide ourselves and bang heads together. And I don't think it's an accident that you find a group of people that you're like, hey, here's some people that we haven't kicked this, like you said, we haven't kicked this beehive yet. Let's kick it and see what happens. Because
and I think you're 100% correct.
And I'm not saying like we have this mass conspiracy. I think we have a group of people that are quite honestly shitty human beings, and they're just trying to stir the pot, and they love to watch people fight. Like I mean, we've had people in a smaller area. We have had, hell, go back to when you're in grade school. You had that one kid that loved to like stir the pot. Like, did you hear what this person said? Did you hit it? So that natural part of our human makeup is like being exploited, I think, by the internet and everything else and social media, where everybody's like, no, we're like the civil, like this whole bullshit about like we're on the brink of civil war. Not if cooler heads prevail. We're not at the brink. If you like start like attacking other people, like that's where you get to that point of like, okay, let's cross that threshold. But I think the first thing that everybody has to realize is like come to the realization that there is an enormous amount of division in this country.
Yeah.
And I do not think the average population have the ability to pull all the resources and pull all the social media to divide like we are divided. There is something, and I'm not saying it's a mass conspiracy, because I'm sure like at the end of it,
it's very transparent.
Yeah, and so like from my standpoint, I think it's easy to be like, oh, I think it's this person, I think it's that person, and I think what you have to do is like admit there's a problem, and the problem is that we are in a very divisive environment inside this country. We are, and I think instead of talking to each other, we're talking over each other, and I think that's unhealthy. And I think this church, to me, is an example of like, let's draw another group into this conflict and see if we can't turn it into like the Muslims against the Christians, because I could see very easily if the people inside that church went off on them, or some idiot in the church. I'm not saying there was any idiots, but I'm saying like you have that one stupid person in there. It was like, well, you stop, we're funding terrorism and all this other stuff. All Muslims are bad. Like if they'd have said that, like it'd have lit that thing up, and people would be like, and so I think people need to slow down and like stop the high volume, high density, like banging heads against each other, and just realize like we're doing exactly what people that don't want us to get along, we are feeding into that when we start dividing ourselves and trying to like identify as like, well, I'm this or I'm that. Like, no, you're an American, like you are. And like, and And in the same way, don't look at that person as like, I bet they're an immigrant. Like, no, like if I see somebody working, they're working. My wife gets so mad at me all the time because like I'm like, man, I appreciate, like right after COVID, she was like, stop telling people that are, waiting on our table and everything, you appreciate their service. And I said, I do. Like, I 100% do. Like, you could stay at home and not work, but you chose to work. And that, I respect that. I respect the fact that you have chosen to work as opposed to sit at home and collect a paycheck.
And I can tell you, as someone who was a server during COVID, those moments meant the world to us and other servers that I knew and worked with, of that acknowledgement of, hey, thanks for being here. Like, because again, it's that respect, it's the decency, it's understanding, and I think everything you just said I think is pretty much spot on in that, and I don't think it is some big Illuminati conspiracy, blah 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 blah. I think it's straight up, people know how to taking the Jake Lang thing. It's like, it's a kid that grew up in the TikTok, social media, attention grabbing atmosphere. And he knew, even if it wasn't someone else, he knew for certain if he shows up with cameras to that location, he was going to be able to make TikToks. He was going to be able to get clips. He was going to be like, there's so much going on right now where I think it gets overly complicated. Not saying that the overall topic is not a complicated one, but the optics are far simpler, and it's exactly what you just said, of people aren't having the conversations that you and I are trying to have in these videos. It's easier to keep people divided. It's easier to keep people under a thumb if they aren't working. Because again, like, think about how many of the topics that you and I have talked about, we agree on the price. It's what you said in the very first video, which we agree on the problem. It's the pathway to get there that divides us. And so, like, I know from the left perspective, one thing I criticize, liberals and the left for is we can't leave well enough alone when we know we're being baited. Sitting there and being like, oh, it's, immigration is a problem because it's 300 million Haitians or whatever. And then we get caught up on having to explain why it isn't 300 million Haitians, even though we agree that there is a fundamental failure within our immigration system. We get caught up in defending or trying to get the other side to acknowledge that what they said was a lie or misrepresentative or whatever. And that just fuels the division. And where I would see, a lot of people going, benefiting, is if you sit there and say, hey, for instance, let's talk about or I'll use this as the examples. Like, we're focusing on Minnesota right now. And I looked it up the other day. Do you know approximately how many estimated undocumented individuals live in Minnesota? It's about 130,000. Do you know how many undocumented individuals estimating live in Texas? It's like 2.3 million.
Yeah,
Florida's like 2.1. And so we look at these moments and you go, it is easy. Minnesota is a smaller population than so many other places, and yet it's getting all the focus because it's easy to drum up, because there is an actual fraud scandal that went on, that whether, it's been being investigated since 2016 or 2019 or 2022 or whatever, like, there is actual things in Florida or in Minnesota that are documented and that we know are wrong. So there's your initial truth to get people started to stir up. There, it's a blue state, so it's easy to pull in politics to it. Trump against walls or whoever. Like, it is a perfect powder keg of multiple different divisive topics that you can hyper focus on. Because if you had a conversation of 3,000 ICE agents went into Texas to combat the illegal immigrants in Texas, you'd go, yeah, okay, makes sense. Big state, a lot of people, you're going to need more immigration officers. It's right on the Mexican border. Like, it all makes logical sense. And you go, yeah, you need a larger group. Right. But to say, Minnesota, because it's also, again, where I look at the simplification of Minnesota's not near the southern border. And for better or worse, whenever people say immigrants, they automatically think of Hispanics crossing the southern border. But it's this thing where it triggers so many like pauses and questions and whatever of like,
it triggers emotions. I think it triggers emotions. Like I feel like it's really easy to.
You're good. I'm listening. I'm just gonna I gotta step out of the room for a second.
Okay. So like from my standpoint, I look at it and I think you have all these people in Minnesota, and it's like it's really easy to sit there and have the conversation of like, okay, these immigrants have done all these horrible things. And it is like a talking point. I do think that like there are some really bad things that happen and they should be investigated. But before we start drawing these big, I don't know what you would call it, like making these big statements about like all of this is tied to this or all of this is tied with that. Like, I think you get through the investigation, you figure out from the investigation, hey, this is what happened based on all the pieces of this puzzle. This is what happened. This is how it happened. And so I do think it's irresponsible on the right side to say all Somalians are bad. And here's an example of these groups of people did this, because I feel like the people in leadership are just as much to blame than the immigrants that receive some of these benefits. Because from my standpoint, that's one of the things that you find about other countries. They realize that we are a gracious host and in most situations. I think about like when we would go to these countries and we would give them, like, you'd have all these different organizations that would go out and provide food and everything else. And like, so you have the American population's like, hey, we're doing a really good job. But then it stops at the warlords or whoever's running that country. And I think, like, from my standpoint, I feel like on just dealing with what happened in Minneapolis and with the Somalian population, I think it's easy to blame that population. But again, it's a failure of leadership to say, because I do feel like there are probably, you talk about somebody coming into this country and they don't speak the language, they don't have any of the different benefits that that we have, a history or anything else, and like contacts. And like, I feel like the more you live, the more you realize that like you have a lot of things that have given you the ability to be in the situation that you're in. Just like from your standpoint, you got a really good education because your mom was involved in higher education and wanted you to be involved with that. But like, you have somebody coming from a third world country, they don't have those benefits. So like, some of those programs would have been really, really beneficial for people that were here, but I think instead of looking at that, just like the Afghan shooter in Washington, D.C., it's like, aha, we have an immigrant that did a bad thing, instead of saying, like, there are people in this country that contribute that are immigrants and that are not here legally. There are a lot of people that are here that are American citizens that don't benefit a daggone thing. They really don't. They don't make this country better. They just milk it. And that's where I think the conversation needs to go, in my opinion.
Well, and I think it's acknowledging too that, like, to your exact point, of people who maybe aren't familiar with the culture, don't necessarily speak the language fluently, might not be able to read the language fluently. And so to sit and look, in Minnesota, when you're talking about the Somali population, there are definitely members of that population who willingly participated and were complicit in these frauds. But when you look at one of the biggest ones, you look at Feeding Our Future, the woman convicted of it, Amy Bach, she was convicted for 33 years in prison for her role in a $250 million fraud scheme. That's just someone who saw an opportunity to exploit a population for personal gain. And while I'm sure there were people, underlings involved that were complicit in that fraud, they're going through it. I think, like I said, I think 33 or 23 or numerous people associated with Feeding Our Future have already been arrested. But then it gets trickled down and associated. Oh, it's all the Somalis. No, there were plenty of Somali people who were just victims of this, being manipulated and mistreated or being told, hey, that first thing you did for us was illegal, So now in order for us to not turn you in, you have to keep doing this stuff
Oh,
for us.
I agree 100%. I think a lot of the people, so if you're in need and you don't have any way to feed your children, and somebody comes up and says, can you fill out this application? I'm not going to look at like, okay, I'm supposed to receive $2,000 of benefits. I'm going to be like, you're going to give me $500 to feed my kids. Yes, I will sign that piece of paper. And as long as you keep giving me them, and people can look at that and go, I would never do that. But like 100%, if you're here and you have no way to support your children, if you have no way to get a job or do any of those things, like 100%, like there are very few people that would turn their back on their own children or people that they care about to benefit a government. And it's
very easy to sit here and say, I would never do that if you're never going to be in that situation. You don't, until the money's on the table and your kid is starving.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing of, is it illegal to steal a loaf of bread to feed your family? Technically, yes. But is it justified? Also, yes.
Well, and I think when you look at Somalia, you look at the way that country is, and think about the trauma that some of those people have experienced. And again, like, I just think it's short-sighted on on this side of the immigration debate to sit there and go, let's target the Somalians because they've done all these horrible things. Do I think there are things that need to be changed up there? 100%. But like you said, like, don't paint it with the broad brush of like every single Somalian in Minnesota or in this country does not contribute, because I'm sure, and that's what I would like to see. What I would like to see is, instead of the leadership in Minnesota rioting and everything else, tell us a daggone success story. Tell us about somebody that came into this country with nothing, that received the benefits. Because I think about, one of the things I think about is, I think one of my favorite people is, and I don't know, I've never met him or anything else, but like listening to their story, was a senator in South Carolina, and I'm gonna say his last name is Scott. And anyway, he just talked about being in a single family home, mother that worked all the time and everything else, and he was the first person in his family that went to get a higher education. He went all the way through all of that. And like, that's a success story. And I think that is what should be celebrated. And instead of like demonizing everybody that is here illegally, let's start telling stories about people that actually contribute. Let's talk about the people that, yes, I got here illegally. However, because I think our side is really quick to point out, is like, here's an example of 10 people that got here and did it the right way, and this is the success. Like, I don't think it's fair to say the system is broken, and it's both sides of it are broken. It is broken from a standpoint of like, the system to get in this country legally is broken, but also the system that prevents people coming here illegally is broken. And I think we're overwhelmed. And that's what I would like to see, to tell the story about somebody that came here illegally. And maybe that's what it is like, I'm not going to get on and say that I did something positive, because if I do, they're going to kick me out of the country because I'm here illegally. So I get that too. So.
Out of curiosity, because you may have accidentally stepped into a point I was going to address.
That's what I'm here for, buddy.
Are you talking about Rick Scott?
No, Rick Scott is the senator from Florida.
From Florida.
Yeah.
You said South Carolina. Okay, sorry. Because that was kind of the point too, where to tie in a couple things, your comments about, they're people intentionally trying to keep us divided at the lowest level. Absolutely. It's far easier to put attention on.
Tim, not to interrupt you, but like my brain is like this. Tim Scott, he's a U.S. senator. He actually he was one of the people that ran for president in the last election. And I just think like his story, he's got a phenomenal story. So sorry.
Well, no, you're fine. The reason why it pinged in my head is
I almost said Rick Scott, but I was like, no, that's not him. That's a dude in Florida. So
yeah. Well, and so why he pinged in my head is, we're talking about, Minnesota fraud, abusing the welfare system, Medicaid, Medicare, whatever. And everyone's, they're looking at the Somalis who in this case, who I'm going to give most of them the benefit of the doubt that they were just truly trying to make lives better for themselves and got taken advantage of. But when I think for me, where I start to struggle in these conversations, and people always call it, whataboutisms or whatever. To me, I look at it as you have to be able to acknowledge it across the board. And the reason why I say that is, so there's the senator from Florida, Rick Scott, who in the 1990s was found, he ended up resigning as the CEO of a healthcare company because they did 1.7 billion, or they had recorded $1.7 billion in fines and penalties manipulating the healthcare system, essentially fraud.
Right.
And so when I look at it, and when you look at like the day and age that we live in, where you see, George Santos, I think it was George Santos.
You Santos or Soros?
Santos, the former politician who also resigned, but he was convicted of fraud for misappropriating, I think it was campaign funds.
Yeah.
But he's been pardoned, and this, that, and the other. And so where it's these moments for me is, to your point exactly, is it's easy if the people in power can keep the yous and the me's at each other's throat and not paying attention to that 1% doing all the puppeteering behind us. Because if the second you started to take a step back and look and go, pick any subject, I'm a big, my mom raised me to be, your words and your actions have to match. And it's, okay, we're going after Maduro because he's a drug cartel benefactor and this, that, and the other. Okay, then why'd we pardon the Honduran president who was known for, transporting drugs? Like, it's these moments of, oh, we're going to go after, this type of fraud, but look right over here where we also looked the other way for that type of fraud in a different situation or a different circumstance. And so it's that, to your exact point, is it's so easy to find those trigger words to keep the average everyday person. It's the magician of look over here while I do something with my other hand. And it makes it that much harder. And we were talking about it a little beforehand, where, I look at what's going on in Minnesota and Minneapolis, and I'm of the belief now where you look at the protesters and I go, hey, we're towing a line, to put it as politely as possible. We're towing a line on legality and on decency. ICE, I would say they've crossed the line with yanking some people out of cars and, maybe losing their cool a little bit, to put it politely. But what my point is that we're at a point where both sides, I said this beforehand, need to take a 5-minute timeout to catch their breath in their corner and actually let that emotion subside a little bit, so you can come back to the situation more level-headed. And I think that it's this twofold of, like, protesters know how to get stirred up, and once you're already at an emotionally vulnerable state, it's really easy to push someone over the edge. Like, how often have you come home from a tough day at work and you found that, your dog pooped in the crate or something, and you kind of lose it a little bit? It's not the dog's fault. It's everything boiling over from that day. Right. And until we can recognize that as a people across the board, that, hey, maybe we're all, sitting at 8, 9, 10, and we're getting pushed to 11. Like, it's so easy to keep people distracted and negatively engaged and avoiding the conversation if you can keep that emotional state high.
Right.
And I think, I mean, that's just that aspect of, like, if we're going to care about something, let's go after the problem of it, and let's not get tied down with the minutia of, oh, it's the Somalis. It's like, no, it's our entire welfare system needs reform, so let's reform it. But it's easy to look at, like, oh, well, this immigrant population or this whatever, and it's hard because it is that moment of seeing probably good people cast in a very bad light because of a situation created by those trying to manipulate them.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that I agree with you 100%, the only thing I would take exception to is the ICE agents, because, again, no, well, the reason I say that is I've been on the receiving end of, like, bad policy that I had to enforce, and I might not agree with it, but, like, I'm still obligated. I swore an oath to do a job, and that's what these ladies and men of the Border Patrol, ICE, and everything else, they took an oath to do a job, and a job that they are doing. And I think an example of what happens when they don't do that job are the sustained riots and things that happen So like we don't have, I don't feel like in law enforcement you have the ability to ratchet back what you are doing because you are still obligated to maintain the peace. And I understand what you're saying as far as like, well, they need to stop. But again, I feel like they are still being told you need to do this. And so like what I would ask on your side is to say the policymakers, the leadership of ICE, if they want to make a decision to put it on hold, that's one thing. But we can't demonize the agents because they're the ones that are sent out there to do a job. They have sworn an oath to do a job, and they're not doing anything but that job.
Well, but I think where the demonization, I agree that demonizing the entire group of individuals does nothing but fuel the division and the animosity between people. But I think where, speaking from my perspective, a lot of frustration comes in that then gets spilled over onto the boots on the ground is what is seemingly an inability on a larger scale from, Kristi Noem at the head of the DHS or, news outlets, Fox News, whatever, of to sit and not be able to acknowledge that, hey, maybe some of what's happened could have been handled better. An inability to reflect on situations and go, okay, yep, this could have been differently, or to say that maybe not everyone. It's this blanket of like ICE has done no wrong, will do no wrong, can do no wrong. When what I'm seeing with my own eyes, I look at a situation, pick multiple of like, I feel like that could have been done better, and it might be my misunderstanding of procedure or policy or whatever. But when it's the public viewpoint of not knowing that, and it's just taking what we see, my thought on it would be this, and I'll get your input. I think back for kind of a one-to-one comparison recently with ICE, and we've seen it. They've lowered standards. You no longer need a college degree. They're accepting high school degrees. They're doing signing bonuses. They're making it easier for people to get into ICE. And what that reminds me of was like 2003 when George Bush lowered the standards for Border Patrol. And if you go back and you look at the fallout from that, what was found was that you were having the levels of corruption or abuse actually increased because you were having people who weren't trained to the same level as predecessors being put in a truck to cover a 400-mile or 150-mile stretch of border, where they were having cartel members come up and say, hey, here's some money if you look the other way. And they're going, okay, because they're all alone out there and they're not necessarily trained to the best of the best. And these are well-documented instances from back then from the government saying like, yeah, we have an actual uptick in these abuses. And so the historical context to me is when you lower a standard, that also lowers the quality of the result. And so if we've lowered a standard and now you have people that maybe aren't as emotionally stable or maybe are a little more quick to aggression or whatever. I don't know what the psyche vows or any of that is for that type of officer. But I'd be curious when all is said and done, if there's ever a reflective investigation or assessment to see if maybe some of the situations we're coming across are coming from some of these individuals hired through a lower standard, similar to what happened in 2002, 3, 4, whenever it was with the Bush era Border Patrol. Thoughts?
So my thought is that you have walked in, like, just like I walked into yours, you walked into mine. I do not disagree. The standard of employee for law enforcement has gone down dramatically. And the reason being is we have increased pay. So there are more people that would normally not be interested in it. So like when I first started, we made hardly anything, and the pay has gotten up. But the reason the pay has gotten up is because they can't find people to fill like that do it out of a sense of obligation to the public. That is, and I'm not saying that's not a blanket statement over everyone. I'm just saying that, like, factually speaking, there are more people that are getting into law enforcement, and in my opinion, that are more interested in making money and don't have the same level of a public servant that they should have.
Or are
And
more interested in the power that comes with the badge, that they can hold it. Like, we all know that cop from the small town that was
right.
the bully.
And I think, but I think that is caused by demonizing law enforcement, going through the defunding, and again, like that 1% stirring everybody against each other, and then the general population is pissed off because the quality of person that you're running to in law enforcement is down. And one of the things I will tell you is a lot of the problems in law enforcement isn't the quality of candidates. It is the expectation of leadership and I'll give you an example, and this is probably the best example to end with. People were furious at that police officer in Lakeland, Florida, that stood outside that business or outside of that school where a mass shooting occurred. They were furious. They're like, how could you possibly be a trained police officer and do that? And I'll tell you how. And I don't know that guy, but what I will tell you is there are just like in any other occupation, there are people that will do the job and do the stuff that is necessary to protect the public, but they are also the same people that you probably don't want giving you a speeding ticket or talking to you, because like they have that edge. And that's just a known. You work with dogs just like I work with dogs. The dogs that work the best are the ones that have that little bit of edge. And it's the same thing in law enforcement. And so I think it's kind of strange that the general public is like, I want a police officer that I can talk to, that is nice to me, is respectful and everything else. Well, that is the kind of police officer that is going to stand outside the school and let your kids get slaughtered. Not because of any other reason than they do not have the warrior mindset. And the warrior mindset is not the of like, hey, I'm here to make you feel good about yourself. I'm here to solve your problems. They are people that are going like, something bad has happened. I am the person that is going to go deal with that. If I lose my life in the process, so be it. This is what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for the paycheck or anything else. I came to be a servant. I think one of the things, and I'll end with this, and like, I really appreciate your time coming on and doing all that. But like, it was a guy that said that when he retired from law enforcement, the one thing that went into his mind is he was like all the different things when he retired. And he said, you know what? Now that I'm retired, I realize that I will never die in the line of duty. Wow. And like, I thought, like, what kind of person, and I'm not saying on a bad standpoint, but like, that is somebody that is committed to the general public they serve. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that the video I sent you last week of the two officers from Jan 6th, the one of them, it struck me at the end, and it's that exact sentiment that he goes, he's like, I miss it. It was my desire to be an officer to help the public, and this situation took that from me. And that's the thing that's been hardest for me, is I'm not a cop anymore. And like, that struck me so much in this, like, his sense of duty and sense of protection, and that he had that taken.
I don't think it's a quality of candidate. I just think that the things that we use to hire people, it's a generational thing. Just like, you talk about the greatest generation, like, I can say for 100% certainty, like, one of the things people forget about a war is we had the guys that went over and fought all the wars that we've had, Vietnam this way, always went for a period of time. Think about the people that went over before us. World War I, World War II, they were there until they won. You know what I'm saying? Like, until hostilities ceased, they were in there. They didn't go, hey, I'll be back in a year if I make it. It was, I don't know when I'll be back, and I don't know if I'll make it. And
it's all those amazing stories you hear. I think a lot of World War II, of the people who, the Marines won't take you if you're not 18. And so this 16, 15-year-old lies to get in. Right. And this mentality, like, I think it's amazing.
I think it's a sense of duty. And I think that is, I'm not saying there were more people, because I mean, you either have it or you don't have it. But like, from my,
I know that I don't have that personally. I've never had that.
But you do have that sense of right and wrong. And that, like, just like the service, the way your mom said, if you have something and you have the ability to help, you help. And there, a lot of people aren't like that. A lot of people are like, let me take as much as I can away from here. So all I will say is, like, from the general public standpoint, if you don't agree with the policy, like, go after the policy makers. I understand there's frustration there. And I understand, like, I do understand that. I do understand some of the things that they're seeing the ICE agents do is difficult to see. But I also tell you, from being in violent situations, fights never look good for anybody, and that poor lady that lost her life, there's no way to paint that in a good light. It was bad for her, and it's going to be bad for that agent probably for the rest of his career, because there's no honor in for him. There is no honor in that. Like, I don't know him personally, but I know as a police officer, there is no honor in taking someone's life. It really isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, you have an isolated instance where you have mass shooters and things like that, but even then, they still have a mother and a father. They still have family, and so it doesn't stop there. And so, like, from my standpoint, what I would ask people to do is keep in mind that these ICE agents are public servants, and they are doing what they are by code required to do and what they are tasked to do. You might disagree with their tactics, but I think one of the things I think about too is, like, it's really easy I always think about Monday morning quarterbacks or people in the stands.
Oh, yeah.
Like, hey, like, after watching the national championship game, that guy should have never done this. Or, well, I'm in the stands. Like, I can't say that I don't even have the talent to be on that field. So, like, far be it from me to say what they should or shouldn't do. So anyway, good place to end up. I appreciate your time, and as always, it's good to talk to you and good to see your side of it. And have a good evening, buddy.